You've probably heard horror stories about spirits and know how scary they are. But in today's video, you will see two stories where the confusion with the spirits ended tragically. The thing in the hallway won't let me leave the room. Through the peephole, I saw it was still there. The skin glistened in the dim glow of the hanging incandescent bulb. He knew I was watching and got close until the peephole framed just his face. The close-knit faces of my neighbors looked at me, with mouths that could have kissed once, smiled, or tried to. Their tongues fused together to become fat and forked and now licked the glass of my peephole. He steps back without warning, and once again I get a good look at him. Two human forms clashed. The smaller one clung to the torso of the larger one, looking like a gibbon and its young, but distorted into something fleshy and vile. I can see the tendons of your muscles exposed, the vessels and the flaps of that hang from it. I can see the bodies hanging from the larger body, and I can see that the clinging body rubs against it where its meets. But whether it's agony or ecstasy, I can't say. He flees into the dark corners of the hallway, but I'm not mistaken. I know you're trying to attract me, and I don't want to find out why. I need your help, please. I'm trapped on the 4th floor of Heights in room 405, a dilapidated apartment in East Oakland. In the last 6 hours, at what must have been midnight, something horrible happened. Whether it was an invading force or a corrupting evil, I don't know, but I can't leave, and my room is the only safety I have. And even then, I don't know how long until it arrives. I'll have to go back, tell you everything that happened before this, and maybe, just maybe, someone can help me. It all started with that damn fetish. It wasn't the perversion type. No, it was an idol. It was 4 a.m, and I was about to throw a load of laundry in before going to bed, and there she was, spread right in the middle of our laundry room, still slippery from... I didn't know what I was looking at. Something slender hanging from a wooden frame in the shape of a crescent moon, but with every second that passed, the more of its shape registered in my mind, and I almost doubled over and lost my breakfast when I realized it was a dog. And without crucified. The police were called, and it turned out that the new cameras were praised by management and used as justification for yet another outrageous rent increase. It was nothing more than a deterrent, as if they were useless and not even connected to a power source. They let my bathtub sink halfway into the room below me, so although it was annoying, I wasn't surprised. It later emerged that the dog was Mrs. Laurent's beloved poodle, Butterball. The poor widow was hysterical and demanded a full investigation. She might have gotten what she wanted if dusk hadn't greeted us with yet another discovery. Harold, an inmate who lived on the top floor, was found. I'm a night owl through and through, so I was awake when the discovery was made. There was no commotion, just hushed whispers and tense bodies. I tend to crawl up the stairs between the 4th and 3rd floor, since it is sparsely populated and has a small accessible window through which I can smoke. This time, I was trying to fish for a signal as my Wi-Fi was working poorly and my cell phone signal was completely... That's when I heard them coming down the stairs, talking. Elena and Macy from the 4th floor. I could tell by their tone of voice that something was wrong. That's the time. 2 a.m. No one but me stayed up late here most days. I strained my ears to hear. Bent like a pretzel, and there was a mess everywhere. Tony says he thinks it's been there since they found the house dog in the laundry. He tried to call the police, but it didn't work. Elena was whispering to Macy. Well, who was it? Macy asked. That idiot Harold from the 2nd floor. The one Carter beat up for stalking his girlfriend. What was her name? John? It's Joanna. Don't be mean. This is serious. What did Tony do with the body? Sorry, I just think she's scruffy and plain. Far out of Carter's reach, and still nothing. He told the manager and tried calling the police too, but with no luck. He wants the body out of here as quickly as possible, so he sends Tony to the police station himself. But it's been 2 hours and he hasn't even texted me once. I'm starting to get worried. Do you want to go look for him? No, that would be dramatic of me. We're not even dating, just playing around. Still, you know Donut Royal is open 24/7. We can get some and meet Tony halfway, Elena said, and the two started to go down the stairs. I froze, and the idea of trying to escape came to me too late. The two women didn't even recognize me when they passed me. I knew 3 things then: that Elena is having sex with our maintenance man, that I'm invisible or obnoxious enough to be invisible, and that Harold has... I wouldn't have known then, but I would find out later that night that this was just the beginning of a nightmare. I finished my cigarette and went back upstairs in a bad mood, still unaware that anything was wrong. I should have paid more attention to my surroundings during the hike because I'm sure I had already started. I just noticed that all the lights were dimmer, Not much, but enough to be noticeable. I went back to my room, locked the door, and tried connecting my laptop to the internet again. The only 2 pages that loaded were the ones I already had open before the Wi-Fi went down. Reddit and a website random that only played a very low quality section of a video I was trying to watch. It wasn't enough, so I decided to use my imagination, but after 15 minutes and a pain in my hand, I decided to try and settle in for an early night. I gave up after 45 restless minutes and pressed my ear to the wall next door. The couple there, Joanna and Carter, were young and warm, having sex all hours of the night, and I had already enjoyed the sounds a few times. Sometimes they walked around the building in common spaces they thought were empty late at night. I picked them up a few times, but it was never reciprocated. They would finish and leave shyly, and no one knew I was there. Now they were quiet, except for the natural changes and breathing that accompanied sleep. I wondered if they knew Harold had and how they would react when they found out. I wasn't there for the supposed fight between him and Carter, but I had heard about it. Macy and Elena loved to gossip over my smoking spot. I think Harold got them like I did, and the poor guy, trapped in the cage of his delusions, confronted Carter. Everyone knew he had a crush on Joanna, and she was too polite or nice to be harsh with him. So he must have interpreted this as reciprocity, and it ended up with him getting trampled and the residents being silently grateful for it. Poor Harold, in his mid-40s and living with his geriatric mother because he was too confused in his head to go anywhere else. Mary was her name, I think, and then I felt a horrible pang of guilt. She knew about the death of her son, and where was she? I hoped she had completely lost her mind tonight so that she couldn't comprehend what had happened to Harold. I used to fear ending up like him, but that was before tonight. Sleepless and frustrated, I felt like getting another cigarette and went to smoke. I pondered why no one else was freaking out about his death or why it was being kept secret. I didn't think about it until then, but if he had, it's really he in such an agonizing way. Who did this? And were they still around? Cold sweat ran down my face at the question, and I felt compelled to turn around and head back to my room. After 2 more steps, I decided to do just that, but something else was wrong. The hallway was darker now, much darker than before, and the air was cold in a way hard to describe, a bitter chill going straight to the nerves and bones. Vertigo threatened to overwhelm me with each passing moment as the persuasive error intensified. At first I couldn't define it, but as I continued walking, it became clear that the hallway was longer than it should have been. I froze, unable to wrap my head around this fact, and examined my surroundings some more. The ceiling was also higher, a few meters. My mouth was dry now, and I tried to swallow, but nothing could bring me back to lucidity. Foot by foot, I forced myself back to my room and was halfway there when once again my heart stilled in abject fear. At the end of the corridor, on the 5th floor, someone was coming down the stairs. Rational thought should have led me to go to them and ask or warn them about what was happening, but some deep instinct knew this was wrong in every way a living thing could be. Even the stairs leading to the upper floors felt wrong, as if they were not of this world. I would have to get closer to this approaching thing. If I wanted to get to my room, then I turned and tried to run as quietly but quickly as possible down the hall, but I feared I would be spotted before I could throw myself at them. A closet to my right was never locked, served as a refuge, and I tried to enter it as quietly as possible. The closet used a repurposed apartment door, so it had a peephole I could look through. The minutes passed at an agonizing pace, but it finally appeared. From the outskirts he emerged, dressed in ornate fabrics and moving as if dancing in the air. As I looked down, I saw that he was skating in the air, legless and floating. From the hood, a strange flickering light cast over the dark hallway. Since it was at eye level and directly in front of me, I saw a side profile of his face and held my breath to stifle a sigh. His face looked like TV static, flickering in black and white chaos. I closed my eyes then, fearing he would turn to me and I would see him unadulterated. In the quiet moments, as I waited for the door to open, I thought about all the other weird shit I've heard about so far. Tony had found almost a dozen animals around the perimeter of the apartment the last few days. He didn't want to talk about the state he found them in, and I wondered if they looked like balls of butter. And crucified. I waited until my body ached and gathered the courage to peer into the hole once more. An empty hallway greeted me, and I slowly opened the door and walked out. This floor was occupied by just me, Macy, Elena, Carter, and Joanna. I went to their door and stopped myself when I went to knock. I hesitated for a moment before trying the handle. I shivered when it opened, and I walked in, trying to close the door as quietly as possible. I called out to them in a low voice, but as I looked around the empty room, I felt silly. Before leaving, I decided to check their room. Someone needed to know what was going wrong, and I still don't know what the hell is going on. At first, I didn't recognize them. I thought it was a pile of blankets, but as the heavy movement and labored breathing made something click in my head, I couldn't stifle the scream. This caused, or more appropriately, to lift up to stare at me, and I was under no illusions of what it was like. Carter and Joanna were permanently united by and mouth. They were. When this happened, then Carter had his body out over Joanna's and her arms and legs around his torso, waist, and in this. At first I thought they had been, but the more I looked, the more it seemed like the flesh had peeled off them. He got down on all fours, if you can call it that, and let out a breathless grunt in both male and female voices. The joined mouth smiled at me, and when it took a step toward me, I finally recovered. We both ran at the same time, but it was slowed by the deformed mass. But the distance between us was still too small for any comfort as I ran down the hall towards my room. I thanked God I hadn't locked the door when I opened it and turned to close it. I screamed the moment I came face to face with the abomination, and wasting no time, I fled and locked the door. He tried the handle a few times before resorting to soft knocks and then deafening bangs and then silence. Now it's just waiting for me, but what I fear most is that whatever did this to them will come, drawn by its presence, and do the same to me. It's been hours, but the sun hasn't risen yet. I tried sleeping in the bathtub. I couldn't stand the proximity of my bed to Joanne and Carter's, but when I got in, I remembered that half the tub couldn't support my weight, as the water damage had left it half sunk into the floor. So I went back to the room and saw my laptop still there with this page open. Please, if anyone can help me or has any ideas, now is the time. I don't know how much time I have left. Just now I decided to peek out my window and was greeted by a gloomy darkness, but what really scares me are the few gaps in it. Occasionally, lighting flickers across the sky and illuminates the world below, a lifeless sea of sand. The lighting came in bright flashes smeared with black and white patterns like TV static. A lot has happened since my last post, but I wanted to thank everyone for the suggestions, mainly the bathtub suggestion. Salt is ineffective against everything that's going on here, and I've learned my lesson about trying to eliminate static noise. I haven't slept since, and Joanna and Carter are still hanging around the hallway playing with me. I can only imagine that whatever distorted their bodies also distorted their minds. I thought I was screwed, but then I remembered the bathtub. I went there with my backpack full of a few bottles of water and my laptop. The owner and management have known this for 6 months. Water penetrated the walls and began to rot on the floor. So much so that the end of the bathtub was visibly sunken. When I showered, I hugged the end of the drain, afraid that my weight would cause it to fall to the floor. Now I went to that end and entered. He sagged and groaned under my weight but held on, so I started jumping on him, landing with all the strength I could muster, until on the third try the ground gave way and I kept going. I landed badly, breaking my side on the outside edge of the tub, and I was out of breath, but I managed. My bathtub and part of the floor were in the downstairs neighbor's bathroom. Removing bits of debris, I struggled to my feet and walked out into the living room. A single mother named Naomi lived here with 2 young. I had never spoken to her, but I had a brief interaction with her son who asked me my name of all things. I knew they often spent the night at her baby daddy's house. Again, Elena and Macy's gossip informed me, and that was true tonight. The living room and bedroom were empty, and I was grateful. I tried to hurry as my fall to the ground wasn't exactly silent, and if there was anything else out there, it was certainly heard. I ran down the hallway in long strides, trying not to look, but there were details you couldn't help but notice. A section of the brick wall was bleached monochromatic, black and white, and back to faded red. I didn't stop to watch, I had to keep walking. Only when I found several doors stained with did my pace slow down, but I didn't stop. I tried not to think about the people who lived there or what had happened to them, but by now the apartment should be full of the sounds of life instead of the dark, oppressive silence I was in. I got to the stairs and practically went down an entire flight of stairs to the 2nd floor, pumping and high confidence I was running now. This hallway was warped like the one on the 4th floor, but in much more extreme ways. Not only had the walls narrowed, but they were also tilted, warping and turning at an angle every meter until the corridor was almost spiraling. I had to slow down until I stopped to get my bearings, as everything was very dizzying. The floor beneath my feet went from faux wood laminate to smooth stone that felt almost slippery. The brick walls had melted into a sticky, stained brown fabric draped over what appeared to be a railing made of the same smooth stone. It looked almost organic, but at the same time it could be woven. The thick hanging threads made me think of sea anemone tendrils, and I shuddered at the thought of touching them. So I forced myself to run once more, passing through an open door into a room that had a perfectly shaped body, in half and sprawled on the floor. The pile of intestines between the two halves, writhing and rising into the air. It scared me enough that I ran through the next open door with my eyes squeezed shut. It was Harold's room, and I dreaded seeing what had happened to him. I thought mercy was on my side when the hallway finally straightened out and the next half-dozen doors closed. But when I reached the last doors that lined the hallway, the one on my left opened with incredible force. Hands of black emptiness reached out to grab me, and I spun out of the way just before they made contact. But I couldn't stop the momentum and stumbled on the cold, slippery floor. I tried to get up when the door to my right opened, and Sarah Palmer emerged from it. I knew it was her, despite her corrupted form and covered in muscular tumor-like growths. The severely obese woman merged into her scooter and used it to move forward. The flaking flesh made this difficult as it had gotten tangled up around the wheels, but it still moved slowly. The center of its abdomen opened into a hole, and with a shudder and a grunt, a vile, bile-like fluid erupted as it vomited a small figure onto the ground before me. A got up at the same time as me and followed me in my panicked run down the rest of the hallway to the stairs. The thing the size of a small made of diseased and partially digested tendons screamed quickly like a joyful as he closed the distance between us with a jump. It was my turn to scream as I tried to shake it off. As it moved up my back toward my shoulder, I grabbed the thing with my hands and ripped it off. The flesh was gelatinous and my fingers sucked it in a way that made my stomach turn. "Tag yourself!" The thing was said in a voice that I found vaguely familiar. Repulsion led me to throw him at the wall with all the strength I could muster, and his body crushed and splashed on impact against the wall that had returned to normal. He let out a small groan of pain as he slid from the wall to the floor. As I ran, he spoke in an agonized whisper that I couldn't get out of my mind no matter how hard I tried. "Chris, why? I just wanted to play," he said, and I had to suppress a heavy sigh as I climbed the flight of stairs to the first floor lobby. The only who knew my name here was Naomi's son. They shouldn't be here. Not tonight. They always went out to their father's house during the week. Would Naomi have canceled the reconciliation attempts that night, or did this start earlier than I thought? I didn't know, and I wouldn't think about it until I got out of this nightmare. The lobby was normal except for the lack of light, but now the darkness did nothing to stop me. The exit was there and I ran towards it. The double glass doors froze me in place, not because they were locked, but because of what lay beyond, a totally dark world where nothing could be seen except the momentary brightness brought by the lightning that ripped across the sky like whips made of TV static. In those moments I saw them, a line of things just waiting for me to get out. One of them was a pale, smooth humanoid with a hole in its leaked a dark black fluid. It had no face. Another was a tangle of violet tendrils that appeared to be made of smaller, twisted strands. Then there was one that was a huge serpentine, dotted with eyes the size of human, each iris oddly shaped, and one end of what I assumed was the head was filled with jaws that must have been 6 feet long. There were dozens of others, but their forms were too varied, too abstract to be accurately described. What caught my attention most were the many puddles and red stains on her feet and bits of clothing, one of them obviously being Macy's distinctive denim jacket. A work boot was lying on its side, and I thought it might belong to a maintenance worker. I wouldn't leave. Not from here. I tried to comfort myself by telling myself that whatever was keeping me here wasn't letting them in, but it wasn't reassuring at all. I ended up crawling under the shitty table in the lobby and curling up in a ball for what felt like hours. For all I know, it could have taken longer, but nothing mattered at that moment. I was only when I heard the sound of a... As I passed by, I moved. Coming out of my hiding place, I saw them. The clothed figures, 6 of them now. On their shoulders, they carried the weight of a marble slab, and, on top of it, a shrunken figure. I watched them, their backs to me, shuffle across the room and into the hallway that led to the manager's office. I tried to sulk as silently as possible to witness the ritual that was about to take place. The porters lowered the slab, and when the light shone on it, I realized who it was. The body was folded in on itself until it formed a circle. The belly was pointed at the world, the back and spine contorted and twisted, the eyes empty, but damn mouth. Harold was smiling from ear to ear in an expression of pure ecstasy. The chanting began then, as Harold's twisted, backward-looking gaze fell on me. Strange, guttural, deep, reverberating, and inhuman vocalizations. The sound of a mountain separating or two worlds coming together, the vibrational forces of the universe melting a boundary that kept the background machinations of a reality invisible. Somehow I knew this, that we had been dragged into this nightmare, but why or by whom I still didn't know. They continued the chants until the space in front of them began to ripple like water, and when they ceased, so did the distortion. Half a heartbeat passed before he like glass, and beyond it, a huge eye. I flinched, hoping he wouldn't see me, but if he did, he probably didn't care as he retreated into the darkness before leaving. A slender arachnid leg covered in jagged angles and spines came out, followed by another and another, until a huge monstrosity of legs and appendages emerging from a central core stood before the cultists. One eye with concentric pupils was in the center, and the rest radiated like a sea urchin. Each aspect spoke of the agonies it could inflict. It looked like pain incarnate, with the enormous amount of sharp corners and serrated spines. Every inch of his being was made to cause harm, and the more I looked at him, the more details came to mind. Hooks and braided spikes, tendrils laden with hungry, gnashing mouths. What stood out most was the way it distorted the space around it. Although it was within a confined space, as I looked, it seemed to expand the air around it, so that some hidden aspect of itself could be felt. This was part of a much larger whole, and I had the impression that some huge hands on a cosmic scale were holding this thing in front of us, and yet it was the same thing. I looked away, no longer wanting to contemplate that abomination, that emanation of pain. He spoke then in a strange language, a sound as vile as a rusty nail being dragged across my eardrums and corneas. But I understood. Unmistakable gratitude. I went back to my hiding spot and waited for it all to be over, waited for them to leave, and they did. Walking down the hall, past the stairs to the basement laundry room and into the common room. It's been hours and they still haven't emerged. I took the time to try and silently search the manager's office. Next to a pile of fine pulp still had the crying face of Mr. Roderick, our landlord, an axe. I answered, knowing it would be of no use to me if I faced those cultists or the pain entity. What I did know was that Harold had a role to play in this one way or another, and that his room was just one floor up. If there is any chance of escape or answers, it will be there. If you don't hear back from me, I'm sure there's no way anyone outside this hell can help, but I still ask you to wish me luck. I certainly know I'm going to need it. Heights has always been hell. I know that now. I mean, I never doubted that some of the people here were idiots, but in the time I had to reflect, I realized how destitute or cruel they were to each other. Maybe when people group together like this, with no purpose other than housing, unpleasant things arise. I regretted once that to them I was nothing more than a sullen shadow only partially remembered. Once my landlord forgot I lived there and had Tony prepare the place for a new tenant. Now I'm not so sure I care that much. Being one of the forgotten ones may have saved my life. I was ready for the horrors of the second floor hallway, finding my hands grabbed with an axe blow that nearly severed one of my hands at the wrist. Stepping back, I used the tip to crush another grabbing hand until I could move past them. Sarah Palmer was next, spinning around on her scooter to face me, but it was too late. The tip of the axe sank into the soft flesh like putty, and when I released the axe, half her face fell off. I heard her laugh as she ran past. Something was burning in me. Even if I didn't hear, I had to know what and how descent into madness was. The door to Harold's room was still ajar, and I made sure to lock it the moment I entered. Only then, I slowly turned around. At first I thought it was graphorrhea. I had read about it late one night, a disorder most often associated with schizophrenia. The incoherent written and spoken ramblings. The floor of the room and the adjacent floor contained countless sharp-edged sigils and glyphs. They seemed occult in their settings, but the characters themselves were completely strange. The center of the circle was free of scribbles, but stained with brownish red. I knew that's where Tony found Harold's body. There was a diary left on the coffee table, and leafing through it, I confirmed that it was his. In the few minutes I had in that room, I didn't have much time to really understand its content. And although I still have it, and it's been hours since then, I've only been able to come up with a rudimentary understanding of what Harold was doing. I'll summarize it here as best I can. Harold returned to live with his mother after an episode that cost him his job a year earlier. They lived off his Social Security checks, and he deeply resented her for her advanced age. Every day, she woke up with less of her mind intact. He was also having problems with extreme frustration and began deliriously clinging to Joanne's politeness as a sign that she wanted him. The confrontation with her boyfriend Carter was the breaking point. It wasn't the reason he did all this, but it was the final straw. But he had reason to resent everyone here and detailed all his grievances, big and small. I then learned the difference between being someone left aside but still scrutinized with a look of supposed threat like Harold, and being completely forgotten like me. In its pages and pages of detailed slights, my name never appeared. My existence failed to register with someone who was uncomfortably similar. It made me feel bitter, and I don't know why. Then there was talk about what he called the bottom world. I still don't quite understand what it is and its purpose, but that's what unites it all. I'll let Harold explain in his own words. I first saw it in a dream, then in a vision. It all started with a fanged worm taking a bite out of the air and, like a finger cut, ripped away what I thought was real to show me the machinations that lay behind what could be seen. Two places within the same space, but never allowed to touch or interact. As above is below and below is above, everything mirrors one another. If it exists here in our layer, it exists below in the background world. That was the first rule he told me, the most important to create an interest where we can finally meet. The second rule is that for an Autarch to touch the human domain, something must be offered to him, a life or part of it. Most of the time, the offer is someone else. The greater the supply, the more an Autarch can manipulate the human domain, as long as it is within their sphere of influence. The most powerful offerings are yourself, a year of your life, or the greatest joy you've ever felt. The greatest offer you can make to a mayor is your own life. There's more. He mentions that the Autarch he is in contact with is one who operates in the sphere of agony. Pain is his domain, and Harold Kneepain is better than most. The best I can figure out is that he somehow came into contact with this entity. Perhaps it attacked him for being vulnerable, or perhaps its influence confused his thoughts, or perhaps what he learned was too much for any mind to bear without consequences. I say this because I don't believe that Harold was crazy and sick and in need of help, but there are enough similarities in the strange runic language and his journal that it seems like he was actually discovering something. He wasn't a raving madman, at least not until he let himself sink even further under the influence of what surrounded him. He spent the week leading up to the fateful night of his preparing for fall in the background world. 16 were placed around the apartment to mark the boundary where the Autarch would lift the veil and let our worlds merge. 6 of them were made from parts of his mother. The rest comes from stray animals and pets scattered around the apartment. The last of them was Mrs. Laurent's dog in the laundry room. Mirrored above and below, even though they were removed, they still created something in the background world that sanctioned this hell. Harold regretted never putting one in the cellar below, and this was my chance. Maybe, just maybe, the building was only partially inside the interstice, and if I managed to get to the second basement and emerge, it would be to the outside I had always known, or maybe I would go straight into the deep world. Regardless, I had no choice but to try. I searched the apartment and discovered that Harold drank a lot and liked cheap vodka. I made 5 from what he had and started walking back to the first floor. Entering the hallway, I was greeted by them, the infinitely who had started this. I greeted them with a sprinter's toss and an axe swing. The side of Carter and Joanna's faces took the blow, and although the flesh came off in a huge chunk and I heard the tinkling of teeth hitting the stone floor, they didn't even flinch. Carter tried to lunge at me, arm, but I threw myself against the wall and tried to get behind them. They turned to try and face me, but the strange distribution of their weight made them clumsy and the fear I felt disappeared. Another axe blow sank deep into compromised muscles and bones and passed through them much more easily than uncorrupted tissue. It was enough to almost, and they let out a horrible panting sigh. Another blow was met with an axe blow that sent almost half of his fingers bouncing across the floor, and a final blow on the neck put an end to that. Even though their heads were on the floor in front of me, they didn't die. What was left of their face was opening and closing its mouth, and I could see that the destroyed cheek was beginning to restructure and regenerate. This truly was hell, created by a resentful heart. The body didn't fall, and didn't stay still either, jerking and twitching. Eventually, it began to grab the... I lit the Molotov the moment he held his neck and threw him the moment he lifted him. They exploded in a ball of fire, and I swore I heard screams, as if some part of their twisted mind registered what had just happened, and I hoped the fire would be enough to finish them off. The second Molotov was thrown into the corner where Sarah and the helpers tried and failed to once again trap me. I would burn this place down if I could. Maybe then I could spare them. The third was thrown onto the lobby table. The last two went to the laundry. I didn't know if the building would actually burn down, but I wanted to do some damage, do something. The mad dash to the laundromat was the fastest I've ever run. I'm sure of it. I was sure that the commotion and fires would have caused the Autarch and his cultist to emerge from the administration office. But nothing stopped my descent down the stairs to the laundry room. I fell onto soft ground and the lights were now dim and red like... But even so, I saw the horror that was before me. A pulsating mass, a conglomerate of flesh, formed in the center of the room and spread across the floor, walls and machines. Every inch was living tissue and tendons, nerves, vessels, all of it. A dozen limbs fluttered and weakly into the open air, and I swore they had some identifying features. A watch that could have belonged to Jose from the 7th floor, the sleeve of a neon green sweater characteristic of Kiana, a university student. I didn't need another reason. The 4th Molotov was thrown onto the fleshy floor behind me and the end straight into the tumor. The darkness was eclipsed by the blazing sun behind me. The basement threshold and my hopeful exit were before me now, but I hesitated for a moment. The heat hit my spine, and my eyes watered from the rising smoke. If I were wrong, I would be, but it would be by fire or not. I stepped forward, and the moment my foot touched the first step, the world behind me plunged back into darkness as the fire died down. In an instant, everything stopped. The heat, the smoke, a curtain of silence fell, and a wave of terror rose. I knew I shouldn't have looked back, but I couldn't help it. With my heart racing, I threw my gaze back and saw the Autarch of Agony who caused all of this, goaded and tempted Harold with his promise of pain to everyone he hated. The center of his eye blossomed before me and grew to encompass everything before him in his vision. Yes, it was a vision he showed me. The screams around me increased as the tumor grew to the size of the apartment itself, a living building. And yet, he was still small in size compared to the Autarch who looked down on him. The countless tendrils and their instruments of torture reached the Tower of... and she tore and cut and tore and ate, and everything grew back. It would continue like this for all eternity. This was Harold's dark wish. The thing began to swell and divide, a perfect copy of its spherical shape, mitosis. This thing could split, and that's how it planned to keep its promise and continue operating without being tied to it. I screamed, or I think I screamed, because when I managed to take my eyes away from there to look around, I saw the shadow of my exit, the descent into the underground. I ran, refusing to look back. I couldn't look back. So into the murky depths I went. I had been underground once, small and damp, with just a few tables and folding chairs. There were no entrances or exits except a single narrow staircase and a rarely used door, leftovers from a bygone era. It was always locked and locked, but the door was old, wooden, and I was sure all it would take was a good kick to break it. But what was before me wasn't the basement. No, it was some dark plane of reality that couldn't be the underworld. I had seen brief glimpses of him outside my window, and this was different. Narrow and claustrophobic, but at the same time impossibly expensive. The light didn't exist here. Even when I tried my lighter, the air around me chased away the lighting. I reached out to touch the concrete walls and discovered I was in a tunnel. With no other option, I walked and walked until time no longer had any meaning. I know I must have been there for hours as hunger and exhaustion forced me to rest, but comfort was impossible, so after a few minutes I got up and moved on. When I finally came across a poorly lit exit, it hurt my eyes that had been bathed in darkness for so long, a shallow staircase that led down to the sub-basement that I had always known. The door was there, and with a frantic kick it fell, and I burst into the world above with a scream half of joy and a sob half mad. It was noon, and Heights no longer existed. I had come from underground to an empty, overgrown plot of land. A nearby homeless man turned to stare at me momentarily before returning to whatever he was doing. There is nothing about my ordeal, and no one remembers Heights. I've done research on the residents, and it's as if they don't exist. Everything and everyone marked by the Autarch of Agony ceased to exist in any meaningful way, or were rewritten from history. I found Macy's mother and called to ask about her daughter, and she swore to me that she never had. The company that owns the lot told me it has been vacant and on the market for half a year. I haven't been the same since I escaped Heights. There's still so much in this damn diary, but every time I look at it, I feel an overwhelming sense of destruction. There are so many questions. If what is below is reflected above and vice versa, how has the world changed? Now, as you say, there is a tower of that rises above the world below and casts its long shadow on the world above, and I shudder to think how it will manifest itself. I know heights cast its shadow over me, darkened my heart in one way or another. The people there didn't deserve what happened to them, and Harold deserved better, but through hate or love their gaze escaped me. I once resented it, but now I find solace in it. The nightmares will never end, and I will never be okay. But at least anyone who casts their hateful gaze upon our world will see nothing but a shadow in my place. Q, said Abby. We've never met before, so this might seem a little strange, but I feel like it's necessary. First off, my name is Jay. I work the checkout line at the grocery store on 67th Street. You know, the one with the parking lot too big for the store itself? Yes, that one. I'm 24 years old. I'm quite tall and I have a rather disheveled appearance. You probably wouldn't recognize me if I were to talk to you. I don't have a very memorable face. Hey, I really don't know why I'm telling you all this, to be honest, but that's not the point of me writing to you. I was working late last night. It was a normal day for the most part. Nothing too exciting happened, but you'd be surprised how interesting this job can be sometimes. I was reading a book that the guy who worked at that counter the shift before me had read. It was a really horrible murder mystery, full of cliches. Incredibly boring, if you ask me, but it's something to do, I guess. When you showed up, my whole night changed. I don't know exactly what it was about you that caught my attention at first, but as soon as I saw you, I had a strange feeling. A strange mix between excitement and terror, at least that's the best way I can describe it. I saw you get into my line and I quickly composed myself. I had been slumped in my chair for a while now, as I rarely put anyone in my line. It was only when you approached that I realized what you had caught my attention. You looked absolutely beautiful. You walked over and said, "Hey," and handed me your card. I could tell by the way you were talking and the way you looked that you were very sleep deprived, although that wasn't surprising considering how late it was. After a second or two of awkward silence, I realized you had greeted me and suddenly forced out a "hi" in response. I mentally cursed myself for it. I sat there for a second, trying to concentrate. "What's your name?" I said. Only later do I realize how strange this must have seemed. What kind of grocery bag guy asks what someone's name is? I'm glad I did it. I remember you said your name was Abigail, but you're called Abby for short. Abby, it seemed like a perfect fit. The name seemed to roll off my tongue as I said it to myself silently. It was like sweet honey. It felt good when I said it. You looked perplexed when I looked at you and wondered if I had done something to upset you. "Shouldn't you be packing this?" you said and pointed to your purchases. Suddenly shocked and embarrassed, I looked up and apologized, then clumsily began stuffing the groceries into the bags as fast as I could. I couldn't believe myself. How stupid could I be? But when I looked up, I noticed you were laughing. "You're kind of cute," you said. I tried to act cool, but I obviously got emotional. A girl like that thought I was cute. "You too," I said, as I hurriedly packed the rest of the groceries. As you left, you turned around as you reached the door and said, "Have a good night." I think I sound really stupid writing all this. You probably still remember. I mean, it happened yesterday. But I went home ecstatic that night, and with all the confidence in the world, I feel like it's almost unrealistic to write this here. Anyway, I wanted to write this letter to you, Abby, to tell you that I love you. I don't know what I felt that night. It was a strange mix of emotions. But all I know is that even in that little transaction we had, I felt like there was something between us. Please write back to me soon. Best regards, Jay. Dear Abby, it's been a week since I sent my last letter and I still haven't heard back, but that doesn't matter. How have you been? My life has been as normal as ever. I get up, go to work, go to bed. I live in a shitty apartment, but I guess that's what you get when you work as a supermarket bagger. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and sometimes I wonder if you still remember me. I saw you again today at work, this time at a more reasonable time, luckily. I didn't want to bother you to see if you would approach me on your own. You came to my line again, which made me absolutely thrilled. This time I was less nervous. I would act normally no matter what you did or said. I wouldn't let a girl like you slip through my fingers. As you approached, you mumbled something that was too quiet for me to understand and waited at the end of the counter for me to finish bagging your purchases. Obviously, this wasn't what I expected, but it wasn't too bad. You didn't seem to feel anything at all, actually. I expected you to come and talk to me, or avoid me like the plague, but instead you just moved on like I was another stranger. It makes me wonder if you got my last letter. You should check your mailbox more often. There was a moment when I felt something. I looked briefly to see what you were doing, and at the same time you seemed to look at me to see how far along I was. At this moment, the eyes are locked. Just for a second or two, but in those 2 seconds I saw so much more in you than I had seen last time. I felt like I had known you for years, like I knew all of your intricate feelings and emotions. Did you feel something like that with me? Shortly after you finished packing your bags, you paid and left. Obviously, this was a pretty normal process for me, considering I do this about 50 times a day. But I was determined from the night I wrote that letter to you that the next time I saw you, I was going to get more out of it. I kind of messed up and I wasn't satisfied with that. I needed more. There's a small room in the back left corner of the supermarket for employees. There, although I knew they kept all the security footage for the day, all employees are informed of this and the location of the security cameras when they are hired. Luckily for me, there is one positioned right next to my counter. I waited until the store closed and everyone left, and then I went inside. After flipping through a few TV screens, I found the one that was connected to the camera near my counter. I rewound until I remembered you coming. After a few minutes of scanning, I found it. There you were. I stopped at the best photo I could find. I knew the camera wouldn't do it justice, but it was the best I could get at the time. Looking closer at you, I realized how truly perfect you were. Every feature of your body, your hair, your face, your legs, and your chest, it was just perfect. I rewound the tape to when you first appeared in my speech a few times. I couldn't help it. My eyes were glued to the screen. After a few minutes of reflection, I took the tape, stuffed it in my pocket, and headed home. I knew I wasn't allowed to do this. I could very well be fired for taking such actions, but I couldn't help it. I needed to have you with me all the time, even if it meant losing my job. Abby, I love you. I love everything about you. I think about you constantly now. Do you feel the same way about me, Abby? I just want us to be together forever. Right back soon. Best regards, Jay. Dear Abby, it's been 3 days and I still haven't received a response. Why don't you want to talk with me? I'm still not sure if you received my last 2 letters. Please tell me if you did. Then I got fired from my job and they found the missing tape. I got a call from the store owner, my boss, at 6 a.m. on Monday morning and was told to come in immediately. They were having a mandatory all-employee meeting. When I got there, all the staff were gathered around a small table with the owner at the front. Once everyone arrived, he told us that apparently there was a small robbery yesterday. They had about $200 worth of stuff taken from them. And the only tape that would have shown who the culprit was the one I had taken. Just my luck. He told us that no one would leave the room until someone confessed. After a few minutes, I finally gave in. I told him everything about how I felt like you and I had some kind of connection. After explaining the whole story, the entire room was looking at me with wide eyes. After I finished, I sat in silence for several seconds. Suddenly, the store owner broke the tension. "Jay, you're fired. Get out of here now and don't come back," he said. I did as I was told and got out of there as quickly as I could. That stupid idiot, he always treated me like shit. He's been on my case since the day I got the job. I swear he's just waiting for me to do one little thing that might justify my dismissal. And the one time I slip up, he finds out. Why didn't he understand? Doesn't he understand that you and I were made for each other? Any rational man would have understood. Anyone put in my situation would have done this, right? I've been looking for you a lot lately. Without a job, I have all the time in the world to learn about you. Do you know how much you can find out about someone with just their first name and city of residence? I discovered that his last name is Merritt. What a beautiful name. Abby Merritt. I can't help but say it out loud whenever I think of you. I also found out that you are 24 years old and live just a kilometer away from me. I went to your apartment complex today. It looks really nice, much nicer than where I live. I asked to see you several times, but was told you weren't there every time. I felt increasingly discouraged, but I was determined to see you again. After a few hours of asking, I decided to stay in the parking lot for a while waiting for you to return, and after many hours of waiting, you did. It was late at night, around 10, I believe. I saw you park your car and get out. I felt a sudden rush of warmth when I saw your face again. I know I have the security camera tape to look at, but it doesn't compare to seeing you in real life. I made a point of recording it for later when I was at home, this time with a much higher quality camera. I wanted to capture as many details as possible. I didn't know the next time I would see you, and the security tape wasn't enough for me anymore. I asked the receptionist several times what her room number was, but she refused to tell me. She thought I was some kind of creep. See, Abby, these people don't understand us. They don't understand how we feel about each other. I ended up waiting in the parking lot a little longer until someone came out. After talking to him for a bit, he told me his apartment number. He didn't want to talk at first, but I did. You'd be surprised what you can make people say to you when you're holding. Don't worry, I didn't hurt him too much, but we can't allow anyone to interfere with us. Don't you agree, Abby? I'm sick of all these people trying to keep us apart. I ended up watching you from the parking lot for a while. Once I found out your room number and how the rooms in this complex were organized, it wasn't hard to locate you. You should be more careful when closing the curtains, you know. I could easily watch you from the parking lot. I can't get you out of my head ever. All I do is watch that video I recorded of you over and over again. Abby, I want to be with you forever. I want to wake up in the morning and see you next to me in bed. I can't wait until the next time I see you again. Love, Jay. Dear Abby, I have very exciting news, Abby. I'm moving in with you. Aren't you excited? We can spend hours and hours and hours together. It will be just perfect. Let me explain. My job paid just enough so that I could pay rent and food every week. Because of this, I had little to no money in savings, not nearly enough to last me a long time. When you withdraw this flow of money, it doesn't take long until you have nothing left. I managed to survive for a few days, but only today was I evicted. This could actually be better than I originally thought. I wouldn't be surprised if that guy who gave me his room number has already managed to contact the police. That way they won't be able to find me and we'll spend all the time in the world together. It's perfect, isn't it? However, I made sure to bring all my tapes and photos I took with me. And my cameras, of course. You should really tell whoever is managing your apartment complex to get better staff. I was able to get through security easily. I went up to his room and knocked on the door, but I didn't get an answer, so I decided to enter by another means. After scanning the images I took last night a few times, I noticed that you have a ventilation duct in the corner of your room. There's no surprise considering how hot it can get here in the summer. I thought there must be some kind of maintenance hatch I could get in through. After a few minutes of looking around, I found a door at the end of its hallway that appeared to be some kind of staff room, and luckily, there was a path to the ventilation openings. I crawled through them until I reached his room. It was very cramped and difficult to move around, but I managed. But when I got there, I felt a rush of success. I figured since the lights were off and I couldn't see you that you weren't home, but I'm patient. I examined every part of his room, trying to memorize every intricate detail. Your scent overwhelmed me as I sat there. I smelled it briefly both times I saw you in the store, but never this strong. It was mesmerizing. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it reminded me of something. It was almost like peaches. I sat there hunched over for a few hours, although I learned to be extremely patient. I can sit completely still for hours at a time without moving a muscle. No one would notice me. So, you finally arrived home. I felt a wide smile form on my face the second I heard the door open. There you were, my love. Of course, you didn't notice my presence. The light in your room seemed to be at a perfect angle, so you couldn't see anything in the vent after the first few inches. I tried to contain my excitement, but I started breathing heavily. I tried to cover it up as best I could, but it was difficult. Suddenly, you looked straight at the ventilation. I was completely silent. After a few seconds, although you seemed to lose interest, it made me smile. This was the perfect location. I could tell it had scared you. All night you turned over in your sleep to look at the ventilation. People seem to be aware that when they are being watched, it can make them panic completely. Don't try to pretend, Abby. I can tell when someone is awake. When someone is really scared, sleep becomes impossible. Why are you so scared anyway? It's just me. Why would I scare you? You love me, right? You know I love you. I look forward to spending every day with you now, Abby. Respond if you can. Dear Abby, I saw you wake up this morning. I didn't sleep a wink last night. You were very captivating. I spent the whole night watching you. I couldn't help it. Whenever I tried to look away, my eyes seemed to fall back a few seconds later. You're even more amazing when you're sleeping, you know. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about a person's personality by watching them sleep. I was tempted to come out of the vent to get a better view of you several times during the night, but I resisted the urge. I couldn't let you find out I'm here, at least not yet. You seem to spend a lot of time in the bathroom in the morning. I assumed you were showering or putting on makeup. Why would you do that, Abby? Anything you could do to change your natural appearance would only cover up your true beauty. Why would you do that? Don't you want the whole world to see what I see in you? You left shortly after for work, or at least that's what I assumed. After careful consideration, I decided to exit the vent. I slid my hand through one of the slots and felt for one of the screws. The surface of the vent was very smooth, which made finding them very easy. I grabbed one of them and twisted it as hard as I could and finally managed to get it out. I did this with all the other screws and finally removed the grill. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom. I quickly discarded everything I found that you could use to mask your face. That stuff disgusts me. This way, everyone will be able to see what you really are like. I also found something else there, his hairbrush. I grabbed it and held it close to my face to examine it. It was a dull blue with a very thick, rounded handle. But that wasn't what interested me. The hair? That's what got me so interested. It took me a few minutes to pull out everyone I could see and line them up on your counter. I counted them, got 59. This pleased me very much. I quickly took them and put them in my pocket. I spent the rest of the day going through your stuff to find out more about you, your interests and such. I assume you're a big movie fan, Abby. I found your collection in the back of your closet. I must say it was quite impressive. I found something else there that made me furious, a photo of you with another man. I felt disgusted just looking at him, holding you like he owned you. I'm the only one who can have you, Abby. No one else. Around 8:30, I thought I'd start heading back to the vent since that's usually when you get back from work. Then I had another idea. I looked at your bed. The blankets were hanging low enough on the floor that you couldn't see under the bed unless they were lifted. First, I screwed the ventilation grill back on and slowly slid it down with a smile on my face and waited for you to get home. When you finally walked in, you looked completely pale, and I noticed someone else walked in behind you. They were talking to you about hearing noises coming from your room during the day. I mentally screamed at myself, I would need to be more careful from now on. Going under the bed was a good idea, as obviously his first thought was to check the ventilation. You thanked the person, and they left. Finally, you and I were alone. I sat in silence until you went to bed. It seemed like an eternity before you went. I wanted to take a look at you tonight, and this was my chance. You lay in bed and turned off the lights. I was cautious, though. I waited for hours to make sure you were asleep, and when I was sure you were, I slowly slid out of bed. And I saw you there. You looked absolutely stunning. Every curve of her body was perfect. Every little detail was beautiful. I was amazed just looking at you. I reached out my hand and started caressing her face. It was as soft as silk. I felt myself starting to get a stand. Her beauty was irresistible. I slowly lowered myself and began to give myself pleasure. I tried to control myself for fear of waking you up, but I couldn't help it. I felt pure ecstasy. Everything about you was perfect. Suddenly, you seemed to turn over and started to wake up. Horrified, I quickly slid under the bed, trying to stay as still as possible. A few seconds later, I saw you get out of bed and look around. I could feel your fear without even looking at you. You should feel calm with me next to you, Abby. I will protect you, Abby. No one will ever touch you but me. I would kill someone for you, Abby. I made a point of paying attention today. You didn't bring my letter from yesterday or any correspondence. You just shouldn't check your mailbox. I'll change that. I'll leave this one on your desk tomorrow. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm doing something special for you. Check your closet after reading this. Yours forever, Jay. Dear Abby, I spent more time today working on the surprise while you were at work. You're really going to love it, Abby. I put a lot of work into it, you know. I spent a few hours today putting the finishing touches on it, and I think it's finally ready for you to see. You got home around 8:30 and saw the letter on your desk almost immediately. I started to smile as I saw you open it, waiting to see your reaction. It was really interesting to watch his face. I could see all his different emotions and thoughts. You looked confused at first, then shocked, then horrified. You started shaking violently, and I saw you were starting to cry. Don't you like me, Abby? Why were you crying? You do not love me. Don't you love me, Abby? Everything after that was a blur. You looked at the closet while still sobbing. You seemed to be debating whether to open it or not. Instead, you ran past and out the door. When you came back, you had all my letters in your hands and started leafing through them. At some point, you seemed to collapse and curl up on the floor, tears still streaming down your face. I could tell you were trying desperately to say something, anything, but you were paralyzed with fear. After about 10 minutes, I saw you looking under the bed in the ventilation, anywhere I could be. You see, Abby, I'm smarter than that. I knew you would look in these places. I found a better place after finishing your surprise. You will never find me here. No one will. Isn't it great? I can watch you forever and ever, and there is nothing you or anyone else can do about it. You still haven't found your surprise, Abby, and I could tell you were still thinking about it. I saw you look at your closet. I knew you wanted to open it, but at the same time, you were nervous. What would be in it? What would you find? This couldn't last forever. You and I knew that. I watched you slowly walk to the closet, fumbling with the handle, trying to get a firm grip on it. Suddenly you opened the doors and saw. It was a scrapbook of me and you. I saw you flipping through the pages. You looked shocked. Don't you like that, Abby? I have photos of you and me when you weren't looking. Photos of you sleeping, photos of you on the computer. I spread the hair I collected through it, along with photos of couples together, of course, with our faces in them. I took that photo of you with the other guy and put it in the background, but I didn't leave it as it normally was. I scratched that idiot's face. I hate him so much. If I knew who he was, I would hunt him down and make him suffer. Don't you understand, Abby? Nobody can have you but me. You and I were made for each other, no one else. I watched you sob for another 30 minutes and then get up and run out of your apartment. Shortly afterwards, you returned with several police officers. This shocked me. Didn't you like the surprise, Abby? Why would you bring these people into our room? They'll never find out where I am, but if they did, it could ruin everything. All my work over the last few weeks would be in vain. You wouldn't want that, right, Abby? I'm exhausted from today's work, and as much as I love you, I need to sleep, Abby. Have a good night. I love you. Love, Jay. Dear Abby, do you see what you've done, Abby? Did you see what you did? I woke up at 8 a.m. and saw you frantically packing your bags. I was confused at first, but then I understood. You were leaving me. You do not love me. You do not love me. How could you do this to me, Abby? You were the only thing I wanted in life. I had nothing else to live for. But when I met you, I saw a glimmer of hope. I thought I would finally have a reason to wake up in the morning and get on with my shitty life. And you went and threw it away. How could you do this to me, Abby? A few seconds after you left your room, I came out of my hiding place and followed you. I saw you throw your bags in the back seat and then get in the car and start it. I wouldn't let you get away, Abby. I would never let that happen. I ran as fast as I could to your car, broke the window and dragged you out. Did you really think you could run away from me, Abby? I had to hit you on the head to knock you out. You were making too much noise. Someone else, someone who doesn't understand, could have seen it and ruined everything. Well, I had a plan if you reacted like that. I went to the warehouse on the outskirts of the city and reserved a space the day I decided to live with you. I drove and unlocked it, grabbed you, and carried you inside with me. You had only been unconscious for a few minutes. I made sure to check your pockets to make sure you didn't have your phone with you. I placed you at the very back of the small room, went in, and lowered the door. I called the warehouse owner and said that he had visited my lot the other day and forgotten to lock it, and asked if he would mind locking it for me. Of course, he said yes, and I hung up. So I threw the phone on the floor and stepped on it to make sure it would never work again. Shortly afterwards, I heard the owner approach and lock the door. About an hour later, I saw you start to get up. I first heard a very faint grunt, then I saw his legs start to move. Shortly after, you were fully awake. When you saw my face, you started screaming, then turned into a moan. That's when you saw it, the other thing in the room. It was obvious why it was there, and after a second or two of understanding, you jumped up and grabbed it. I looked into her eyes and said, Abby, I love you. And then I felt the searing pain of being shoved into my side. I felt it being pulled out and shoved back in with great force. I could feel it enter each time like a fire burning a hole in my. I fell to the floor, laughing while coughing. I saw you step back, shaking, and sit in the corner. And now as I sit here in a puddle of my own writing this, I wonder how you will get out. Will you use the to take your own life, or will you let hunger take you? In any case, we will be together in Abby, together from the day I saw you until the day we both die, just as I wanted. And as you sit there crying, I can tell you've come to that conclusion. Abby, this is all I ever wanted, and for that I have to...